The one question that I did, we get probably 2 or 3 times a day is when are the ARPA funds going to be released to our non-entitlement cities? And the best answer I can give you is the answer that we have from both the Office of Administration and the Missouri Treasurer's Office, which is at this point, they expect Missouri to make that request at the end of the month, which in turn means that there'll be about 4 or 5 days before Treasury gets that money over to Missouri. And then at that point on the Missouri Treasurer's website, they will open up a web page, which will have all the forms for officials to complete. And one of the things that we keep hearing about is just, the counties already got their money, the bigger cities already got their money, and it's just important to note that that's because they got their money directly from Treasury. The way this program is set up, the cities that are under 50,000, the money has to go through the state of Missouri as a pass-through. And to Missouri's defense, they want to make sure that they have everything in order before they do that. They're going to get $800 million from the federal government, and they just want to be sure that they can pass that money out to our 950 or so municipalities that are on that list. So again, as soon as Treasury does have that money, as soon as Missouri has that money, they will open up a website. They have told us that they will do a webinar for us to explain the application process, to go over how you get the money. But in the meantime, I think number one, it's important to note that you're going to have until 2024 to spend this money. So while it's, we certainly understand the urgency in wanting to get the money, right now is the time to think about what you want to do with the money. And to that end, we are very fortunate to have as our presenter, Irma Esparza Diggs, who is the Director of Legislation at the National League of Cities. And Irma and her team have been really instrumental in getting the ARPA Act passed to begin with. And now going forward, they have just been a wonderful resource for explaining how ARPA works. And let me get Irma's title correct. She is the Director of Federal Advocacy for the National League of Cities. And so we are very thankful to have her here today. So please take it away, Irma. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Stuart and Emily. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, even though it's virtually. I wish we were in person, but wanted to be able and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today to walk through the local fiscal recovery fund information, what's in it, what are the allowable uses. The presentation I give, and I think this is probably the 47th State League presentation. So typically by the time we get through, I answer a good number of questions, but then we'd like to leave enough time to get as many rapid fire questions as possible. So by the end of this, we will get to as many of your questions as possible. And if we can't, I know Emily and Stuart will follow up and make sure we get you the information you need. Let me also just remind you all that in addition to the local fiscal recovery fund, the entire American Rescue Plan Act was $1.9 trillion. $350 billion went to state and local governments. So there is a slew of other dedicated program funding that is included in ARPA, and on NLC's website, we include that. There's funding for substance abuse, mental health, housing, FEMA dollars. So you want to make sure you are leveraging those funds in addition to the local fiscal recovery fund, which provides the greatest flexibility. So I've got a lot of information. I'll go through this, but Emily, if you can move to the next slide, we'll go ahead and get into it. And let me just say to all of you all that in total, what is coming to the cities and was equally spent between the cities and the counties, and Stuart's right, there are 19,000 cities, towns, and villages in this country. There's only 3,000 counties. And so it was a lot easier for Treasury to provide direct funding to the larger cities, and then work through the states to send money to, frankly, the 18,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country. So just administratively, we worked hard to get it to you as direct as possible. But once the state, and you're not alone, your colleagues in other states are just now receiving their funding or haven't even received it yet. So it's coming. States are under the gun, though, to hurry up and get that funding out the door as soon as they receive it. So I know a lot of the state leagues have been working with the state government offices to ensure that as soon as that transfer happens, it comes to you. So this is a brand new federal program, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And really hope to give you a better understanding of the state and local recovery fund. But also, I just want to kind of back up and add some context. The National League of Cities, our effort, this was really a 1.5 year long advocacy effort that culminated in the $65.1 billion in direct aid to every city, town, and village. That was a historic first. For the most part, the majority of municipalities in our nation, this is the first time you will receive a federal grant. And so just and that happened because of what we saw with the CARES Act and the reality that a lot of mid-sized and smaller cities didn't receive the funding as they should have, or received it very late. So we truly believe this is something new for municipalities, and we're going to work to not only stand up this program in partnership with the federal government to make it successful, but really help to work with your state municipal league, but also you, just to make sure you fully know how to use it. You're in compliance with the reporting, but more importantly, you're able to use it in a way that can truly allow you to transform and meet specific needs that exist in your community. And so we want to be a thought partner in that, and we want you to help you set up programming. National League of Cities, for those of you who are not members, if you go to nlc.org/state league, and don't worry, everybody, the slides you have here today, we'll share them with you, but feel free to take pictures of the slides as you need to. That's where you can go, the nlc.org/state league, on how you become a member of NLC. We do webinars, we will be doing programming, we will create issue briefs. Right now on our site, all of that information is in there, but particularly as we enter into this next phase of programming for ARPA, that's where we're really going to get into the weeds of programming for specific city staff that are focused on ARPA dollars. So we want to make sure, as it relates to our content, you have access to that. Emily, if you could go to the next slide, we can get into the nitty-gritty, which is specifically the information from Treasury. So since May 10th, Treasury released on May 10th, Treasury released the interim final rule. And since then, they have released numerous guidance documents and supplementary information. If you take your phone and you scan that QR code you see there, it'll take you directly to Treasury's site. Just this past Friday, the comment period closed. NLC did submit comments on what Treasury could do to provide clarification, provide additional information, and frankly, make recommendations on what would make this program easier to use for all cities, not just metropolitan communities, but non-entitlements as well. And Treasury has done a great job of already. So the interim final rule went into effect immediately. And already through consultations, information that we have sent to Treasury, they have already updated their frequently asked questions document. That is a great resource for you all if you have questions. So highly encourage you to directly read Treasury's guidance information, you can go to Treasury directly for questions, and that email is there as well. And they also have a phone number, although it's not on here, but if you go to their site, it's there. We talk to Treasury staff almost daily, as well as the White House, about this. Our comments letter was about 17 pages, and Treasury really wants to work to get this right. And so if you continue to have issues or have questions that you feel like are important to get answered, please feel free to work through the league and communicate those to us, so we can make sure we highlight those, even though you may respond or may email Treasury directly. Happy to be a resource for you. So Emily, if you move to the next slide. We are, this is the guidance highlights. And this is both applicable to, again, non-entitlement units and metropolitan communities. And metropolitan communities are municipalities with a population of 50,000 and above, and non-entitlement, and they receive their funds directly from Treasury. And non-entitlement units of government are municipalities with a population of 50,000 and below. So we've been pleased, as I mentioned earlier, to see many of our recommendations adopted in the interim final rule. Treasury has done a great job of extending flexibility to local governments while remaining within the confines of the law. Highly recommend that you read that interim final rule, but this slide here should help you know what to look for. The rule outlines a non-exclusive list of eligible expenditures, and there are many categories in which spending will be assumed to be eligible. And in many instances, Treasury's presumption is only true for spending within qualified census tracts, meaning that these allowable uses are less scrutinized in places where there are official qualified census tract, where essentially there are just higher concentrations of low wage or no wage residents, or higher concentration of poverty. So these allowable uses are eligible outside of qualified census tracts, but you may have to, actually, you definitely will have to provide additional documentation or data to demonstrate why they should be an eligible use. The rule also outlines encouraged expenditures, which are not explicit in the legislation, but Treasury has provided evidence that these expenses would be good uses of the funds. And so the other thing I just want to say for metropolitan communities, any representative submitting or responding to the portal to request the funds, they will have to identify or verify their identity by providing their social security number, their driver's license through ID.me. That's a trusted government partner. The Department of Treasury doesn't see the contact info, or not the contact information, but the personal identifiable information. I know that a lot of people were concerned about that, and I just wanted to say that that was a way to just verify that that was a real person entering information on behalf of a municipal government. Unlike metropolitan cities, non-entitlement units of governments, or NEUs, will receive, as we mentioned, your funds through the state of Missouri. The other thing that I wanted to mention for you all is that the aggregate, like how your funding is distributed to you, is calculated by splitting. In total, it's 19.5 billion that will go to non-entitlement communities. That will go to each state based upon your portion, the total portion of the non-metropolitan population. And so Treasury subtracted the metropolitan population from the total population, and that's what they use to distribute the funds. NEU grants are calculated and distributed according to each NEU's proportion of the total NEU for that state. So in other words, the aggregate NEU, that's how you will receive your amount, and you'll understand what your allocation is based upon that information. I know Stuart mentioned that the state will do a briefing. They'll give you a briefing on exactly what you need to provide, but I can tell you it will require your municipality name, your taxpayer ID number, your DUNS number, which is your financial information, your address, your financial institution, your total operational budget. You'll be given a NEU recipient number and a SAM.gov registration number. You'll also be given a terms and conditions sheet, and just assuring another sheet that ensures that you are in compliance with other federal civil rights laws. Also, states cannot include additional restrictions or regulations on NEU grants, and they can't distribute it on a reimbursement basis. And so for those of you who are concerned about the state applying additional restrictions, the Department of Treasury has made it very clear that they can't do that. And you know what, Emily, you can leave it there, because I think I accidentally moved forward and covered like how NEUs will receive the funds. But a couple of key points I want to go back and make with the guidance high points, and I apologize for that. The framework, essentially the rule outlines how you can use the funding, but it doesn't give you a lot of ways in which you can't use it. So I talked about the qualified census tracts. The qualified census tracts are actually the Department of Housing and Urban Development identifies that, and you can go to HUD's website to see where that is. But if you want to identify whether or not you can spend ARPA funding a certain way, it's really this framework that you want to identify to assess the eligibility for a project and service. And as a municipality, you first need to identify the harmful effect of COVID-19 that how you will spend those funds will address. So what are you trying to achieve? What harmful effect are you trying to address? You need to be able to assess the connection to COVID-19 in your use of the funds. And also, as a municipality, you need to assess for the disproportionate impact on distressed sectors or populations. And last, you need to determine how you are going to prove that that expense produces the expected outcome. So in other words, when all else fails, go back to this framework. And when you read the interim final rule, it'll make more sense and it'll give you context for which I'm talking. But the qualified census tracts, you have a lot more flexibility to do what you need to do. But if you don't have a qualified census tract, you want to utilize this framework to guide your decisions, and you want to have that data. So Emily, if you could do me a favor and move forward to the next slide, which talks about receiving the funds. And I already talked a little bit about it, but I just want to underscore that the point which I didn't mention is that all communities, whether you're a state government, metropolitan, or non-entitlement unit, you will receive your funds in 2 tranches, meaning 2 disbursements. So your first disbursement, you'll get 50% of it, and 12 months later, you'll get the remaining half of your funds. And if you are a non-entitlement unit, your overall disbursement will be capped at 75% of your total operating budget. And that was just to ensure that as we came up with this broad rule of how funds would be distributed, that smaller communities wouldn't receive an amount that was 3-4 times the size of their budget. And so you will have, as Stuart said, up until 2024 to obligate your funds and how you spend them. But in reality, you have through 2026 to actually complete those expenditures. So, and that's important for you all to think through, especially because as you are planning, you can really take the time to assess what the needs are of your community, so you don't feel like you have to rush and make expenditures. And as I go through the presentation, I'll talk about where you can spend dollars or how you can. If you'll move forward to the next slide, it talks about documenting and tracking eligible expenditures. So local fiscal recovered funds, they can be used to administer their own use. So in other words, you can hire a consultant, you can hire an accounting firm, you can hire legal counsel to help you manage these funds and programs. So just because you don't feel like you have the expertise on staff, that is not reason to accept the funds. The administration definitely wants you to be able to do that and hire consultants to bring on people to help address some of the administrative rules, to help do evaluation and data analysis. But you can also transfer these funds to other units of government. So for those of you who routinely already participate with your metropolitan planning organizations or your regional councils of the government, however it is you call and you kind of work together and put money all in one pot, you can do that here. The interim rule also outlines some ineligible uses, and those uses include federal matching requirements. Matching grants are not allowed as a non-federal match for other programs whose statute or regulations bar the use of federal funds. So in other words, if there is another federal program that you can use federal funds for, you can only use ARPA funds in that program if that program doesn't forbid it. But it does appear that there are programs that do not explicitly bar by statute. If that's the case, it is okay to use ARPA funds as matching dollars. You also are prohibited from providing premium pay for teleworkers. So basically anybody who worked from home is not eligible for premium pay. And I'll talk a little bit about who is eligible for premium pay. In terms of pensions, you can't make up deficits in public employee pension funds that are unrelated to the pandemic. However, a payroll contribution, when an employer routinely makes payments into pension funds on regular intervals, that is an allowable use because that's what would happen anyway, and that's related to the lost revenue. And again, that's another category of funding that I'll talk about in a minute. Infrastructure projects that do not respond to a specific pandemic or public health need are not an eligible use. And also currently, Treasury has not changed this yet, but you cannot use your ARPA dollars to replenish rainy day funds, financial reserves, and outstanding debt. Let me say to you all that I know that there were many municipalities across the country that tapped into their reserves or rainy day funds to prevent greater layoffs, to minimize cuts to critical services. We have asked that Treasury make that an allowable use as long as the municipality can correlate the need. So stay tuned on that. Hopefully we can get that changed. And right now, the rule closed, or the comment period closed on July 16th. I actually think it's going to take some time, but I do for Treasury to finalize its rule and give the final rules for this program. But what I do see them doing is just kind of updating as they are able to make quick decisions. So we often deploy to all of our state municipal leagues anytime Treasury has updated their frequently asked questions or their guidance. So you want to just routinely have someone on your team check that, not only the league, but you all for someone working on in your city, because it's a lot of good information that will come quickly. So Emily, I think we can move forward to the next slide. I feel like some of these slides I can go on and on, but it's a lot of information to cover, so I'll keep going. If you, I'm sorry, Emily, if you can move forward one more slide. I talked about the documentation. So eligible uses. The slide here really goes through the different eligible uses. And the first eligible use category under this bill says that cities can use their funds to address public health and the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. This slide outlines what those public health uses are, which includes 12 expenditure categories. These categories are important for you to note, particularly moving forward as it relates to compliance and reporting. Treasury will very much want to have you report according to expenditure category. Also, just sidebar, Treasury will be releasing user guides to help both metropolitan, state governments, and non-entitlements utilize Treasury's portal for reporting and compliance. So stay tuned on that. They haven't released that, but I do want to say that they do plan to release a user guide, which will go a long way for helping you track the reporting for purposes of submitting to Treasury. The rule shows that cities can improve access to vaccinations and to provide ongoing care for COVID, for instance. You can use the funding for COVID mitigation and prevention, like purchasing PPE, shields, ventilation, to name a few. I know in a lot of communities, particularly as we have this new variant and we are seeing COVID cases increasing in a lot of communities, people are having to go back and purchase additional equipment. So all of that is eligible. All of that is an eligible use. The funds can cover medical expenses for residents. It makes behavioral health, including addiction treatment, eligible. We have seen opioid and the use of fentanyl skyrocket during the pandemic. Know that you can utilize these funds to address those public health and also mental health impacts of COVID-19. Again, this is one of those areas where there's also dedicated program funding that comes through Health and Human Services that will go either through your state health department or whoever it is that administers your health programs at the local level. Let's see. These funds can also support public health and public safety employee wages. And these funds, for me, I think this is key because this is something you don't always think about. You can utilize these funds to improve your access to data, the information you have, the design, the execution of health programs to help you really adapt and make changes to what's happening on the ground as a result of the pandemic. These grants can also be used to address health disparities in municipalities, and they can also be used for survivor benefits, for example, to those residents who have lost primary wage earners for their household. Within each of these subcategories, the rule really provides an extensive list of eligible uses and projects. So moving forward, Emily, to the next slide. Another eligible use is on the economic impact. So this slide here that you see really details the eligible uses regarding, the economic impacts of the pandemic, which includes 14 expenditure categories. Once again, when you do your reporting, you will have to report on these individual expenditure categories if you do spend money this way. As I've said previously, this rule definitely relies on those qualified census tracts that are defined by HUD. And these qualified census tracts, again, they're not hard to find. You can just look them up by city and zip code on HUD's website, or you can Google them and it'll automatically come up with regards to your city. Again, while these funds can be used outside of those qualified census tracts, they are presumed to be eligible in these tracks, whereas in other tracks, whereas you just have to provide additional information. And you want to make sure, just generally as a rule of thumb, that the data that you use to inform how you spend this money is just self-explanatory, and it lives beyond your term, and that anybody can pick it up to understand what the decisions, what the data was utilized in order to determine why you ended up spending money this way. Also, I do want to make a point that these funds can be used to support impacted industries and residents who have been hurt economically. They can be used for direct cash and loan interventions. These funds can be used to support nonprofit organizations to generally improve their capacity. Those nonprofit organizations who were really, frankly, a lifeline during the pandemic. This is your opportunity to help build those. They can also be used broadly for housing and community development. And they can be used for the building of affordable housing. NLC, we do blogs and one-pagers that kind of drill in on, okay, if you want to use ARPA funds on housing, how can you do that? We have resources by issue as well. On the issue of homelessness, I know that has become a crisis in many communities like it never was. Or frankly, it's only gotten worse from where it was before the pandemic. These funds can be used for essentially anything that is eligible for federal homeless assistance grants. And again, NLC can be a resource to you in this area. Lastly, I just want to say this rule is really generous for how cities can support childcare and education. Your state education agencies, your local education agencies that already receive school dollars, they receive dedicated ARPA funding, but the city, you as a municipality can go above and beyond just those dollars. And so, for example, if the city wanted to create or give cash stipends to families to help meet childcare, or to provide tutors to help close the learning gap for specific families who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to, you can do that. That is an allowable use. And again, it's all about just documenting. So Emily, if you'll move forward to the next slide, that talks about how to use these funds to address those communities and meet the needs of those that have been disproportionately impacted. And so Treasury, in the final rule, Treasury continually encourages recipients to use these funds to address those, or help meet the needs of those people who have been hit particularly hard and had pre-existing disparities or inequities that exacerbated their situation during the pandemic. They support allowable uses by highlighting hardships facing low-income communities, particularly communities of color who have higher unemployment and mortality rates during the pandemic. These local funds can be used to mitigate these disparities, and they specifically mention, building stronger communities through investments in housing and neighborhoods, addressing education disparities, promoting childhood or healthy childhood environments. Treasury offers 16 expenditure categories for these uses. So again, as long as you correlate and enumerate for the reporting purposes, each category, that's what they want to see when you document how you are utilizing these funds. So if you move forward to the next slide, Emily, it talks about premium pay. I know there are a lot of questions about this. Cities can provide premium pay up to $13 per hour above regular wages for certain eligible workers performing essential work. And cities can also transfer these funds to third-party employers with eligible workers performing essential work. So in other words, a municipality can provide premium pay to municipal employees who were considered essential work, meaning they showed up for work in person, and cities can actually also transfer funds to third-party employers or other businesses with employees who performed essential work. Essential work involves regular in-person interactions or physical handling of items that were handled by other. And Treasury puts these uses into two expenditure categories. There's one for public sector employees and another for private sector employees. And it gives you there in the essential work categories of who would be eligible. So Treasury wants you to think about utilizing premium pay to help support those people who showed up for work every day in the pandemic when there wasn't a vaccine and essentially put their life on the line. And they want, because most often those were the people who were disproportionately impacted by COVID. They were low wage workers. They didn't necessarily have strong health care if they had health care at all. And so you are able to provide an additional benefit to those folks. Moving forward, revenue replacement. This is the lost revenue. And this is, Emily, if you can do me a favor and move it forward to the next slide. Thank you. I know there's a lot of questions about this. Okay, so to be clear, lost revenue is another eligible use for the local relief funds, meaning any revenue that dried up, that trickled to a very slow drop, you can replenish those funds into your municipal government. The general revenue in the rule draws from the census definition of general revenue of own sources. And so to find lost revenue, recipients, you should sum across all revenue streams covered as general revenue. And it's really just to help you. I'll walk through and talk about this for a minute, but bear with me 1 second. I want to say that ideally we would have preferred the Treasury Department to use a different definition of general revenue for purposes of municipality, because there were certain sources of revenue that were cut out. We did submit comments to the such as utilities. We did submit comments to the Department of Treasury, so fingers crossed that we see some improvements there. But for now, Treasury walks through and guides you on how to calculate your lost revenue. We also worked with the government finance officers, and we have a loss of revenue calculator that you can utilize to help you come up with that number. But essentially, utility revenues were excluded from this definition. But everything else in there, like revenues from from fees, anything else outside of utilities, which is defined as water supply, electric power, gas supply, and public mass transit systems, are included. So stay tuned on that. But essentially, you will use a predetermined 4.1% of your annual average annual growth rate over 3 full fiscal years prior to the pandemic. And you'll do that as of 4 points in time, which is that where you see the December 31st, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. This is really meant to be able to allow you to calculate lagging sources of revenue that come in over a period of time. So not just in the first or second year of the pandemic. So they want you to provide your lost revenue for 4 periods. Again, we have the calculator from GFOA that will help you do that. The interim final rule also gives recipients broad latitude to use these funds to provide government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue. So in other words, if you receive $10, I'm just gonna keep it simple, $10, or you're utilizing $10 of your ARPA funds to for lost revenue, you can pay for any general services, and the guidance gives you examples of what those general services are, up to $10. So that's forgive me for the oversimplification, but just to help you wrap your mind around it. Government services can include, but are limited to, maintenance of infrastructure or pay-go spending for building new infrastructure, including roads, modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, protection of critical infrastructure, health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of police, fire, and of other public safety services. All ineligible uses, though, still apply to this revenue. And so what that means is that revenue replacement funds cannot be used to pay interest or principal on outstanding debt, replenish rainy day or reserves funds, pay settlements or judgments, or replenishment of pension funds or non-federal match programs. So those are the limitations as it relates to lost revenue. So there still are some limitations in terms of fund to general services. So moving forward, Emily, to the next slide. It goes more into revenue replacement and gives you a chart. That's pulled from the appendix of the compliance and reporting guidance that Treasury released probably about 3 weeks ago now. It indicates the things included in the definition of general revenue in green and those excluded from that definition in red. So for those of you who had sizable, or not even sizable, but plan to use these funds to offset your lost revenue, this is your cheat sheet that's found in the appendix of the compliance that would be helpful. Notice that transfers from state governments is included, whereas transfers from the federal government are excluded, and utility revenue is also excluded from general revenue. But as I mentioned, NLC, we're hoping to change that. So moving forward to the next slide, and I know I'm getting close to time and I want to make sure I answer questions. This talks about the fun stuff. I know you all have questions about water and sewer, and the next slide is broadband. So I'll quickly go through these. ARPA allows these funds to be used and necessary investments for both water, sewer, and broadband. This slide here goes through it for water and sewer, which it includes 15 expenditure categories. So once again, just know that if you spend it this way, you're going to have to document it per category. The rule provides flexibility for many projects that improve access to clean drinking water and improves wastewater and stormwater systems. The necessary investments include projects that are required to maintain a level of service that at least meet applicable health-based standards. And the rules align the eligible uses with those allowed under the Clean Water and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So those are two federal programs that exist already. And so for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, there are 11 project categories that are eligible. So if you have a question about a water use, you can go to Clean Water State Revolving Fund and see what those project categories, and see if your project fits under that. The same thing for the Drinking Water Revolving Fund. There are 6 project categories there. Again, this is another area where we have specific blogs and content And we can connect you with our lobbyist who is an expert on water, so she can help provide additional information. Treasury guidance also mentions there's 3 other areas for water and sewer projects that is an allowable expenditure: cybersecurity related to water and sewer infrastructure, so that those systems can't be hacked. We've seen most recently what happens when those systems are hacked and held hostage. Projects that address the issue of climate change, or that's also an allowable use, as well as projects to address lead service lines. So moving forward to the next slide, I'll talk about broadband quickly. This slide covers everything related to broadband infrastructure. So once again, you can use your local recovery fund to help pay for broadband. There are a few eligible projects that will enable municipalities to address the digital divide. First, digital equity activities are an eligible use, and those activities include work to help individuals and households get online. This eligible use is an opportunity to get residents signed up for the new FCC broadband benefit discount, which I think is like a $50 contribution towards their internet. Also, construction of broadband infrastructure is an eligible use. And in the rule, it has what the minimum service speeds are. For sake of expediency, I won't go through that. But again, just know we have a full blog that can provide you with an idea of what is an allowable use for broadband. Just know that eligible projects should be focused on reaching unserved or underserved locations, which are places with residents, businesses, or institutions lacking reliable wireline 25/3 megabits for service. And the rule also encourages projects to prioritize wireline technology affordability, investment in last mile connections, and networks owned by municipalities, nonprofits, and co-ops. This is one area where we were able to really improve what Treasury, we basically worked with Treasury and told them that how they initially released the guidance, it wasn't going to help meet the need of municipalities. So they did improve it, but hopefully they will create some additional flexibility. One important note for you all: Davis-Bacon does not apply to construction projects funded solely by the state and local recovery fund, but projects may need to comply with Davis-Bacon if they are also funded by another federal program that requires it. And so there are some recipients that may need to comply with the Baby Davis-Bacon Acts in your respective states. So be aware that that is a requirement. So moving forward to the next slide, it talks about internal controls and compliance. You can see here that your local relief funds can be placed in interest-bearing accounts. There are internal controls that need to exist, including, you as a municipality need to prepare for potential audits of your local recovery fund. You are generally subject to the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards. So meaning if you receive over $750,000 in a federal grant, you're automatically have certain requirements you have to meet as a federal recipient, including the Single Audit Act. Once again, we have additional information on all of this, but you will have to create also written policy to monitor sub-recipients. So for those of you who transfer funds to nonprofits, other regional governments, or other entities, you will have to have a written policy on how you will ensure that they will also be in compliance, and just continually evaluate the risk of non-compliance. Again, funds have to be obligated by the end of 2024 and spent by 2026. So I know I've gone all over, way over my time. The next couple of slides just detail the reporting requirements. Emily, if you'll go through the next one for me. For NEUs, you will have to complete an annual project and expenditure report. The report, the dates are there, and also you will have to do it for subawards over 50,000 as well. That first deadline for non-entitlement units comes October 31st. For metropolitan units, there's 3 different types of reporting, and those respective deadlines are on this slide, and you all can look at that. So Emily, if you'll go to the next slide, it talks about the reporting requirements by entitlement unit, non-entitlement unit, and the next following slide related to that is Treasury's own webinars that they've done most recently. They recorded them and they are now on their website. So I encourage you all to do that. We have asked them to do one specifically for non-entitlement units. I don't think that has taken place. But just know, just we'll let you know, and we'll work with the league. So I'll stop there, Emily, because I went way over and I want to make sure we answer a couple of key questions. The next slide following this just has where to go and get access NLC's resources. So thank you so much, Emily and Stuart. I'm happy to answer any questions that came into the chat.
Irma, there's several in the Q&A, so I don't know if you want to go through those or you want me to ask.
Oh, I can see them. I can see them.
Okay.
If funds are transferred to a nonprofit or council of governments, what are their obligations? So you as the primary recipient are responsible for reporting. And so that last slide that I talked about, the reporting and guidance, you will have to have a written rule on what they need to do, but they can only spend the money in accordance with how you have determined that eligible use category. So let me say that. So you still bear responsibility for the reporting of it. Let's see, if a city has water, sewer infrastructure upgrades that existed prior to the pandemic, can ARPA funds be used to address those? So yes, if they meet those needs. And so Jackie, you should go to our water and infrastructure, that slide specifically. Go to the interim rule, but also in the FAQs are great responses for you to help decide. Essentially, you can use your ARPA funds to pay for an infrastructure project that is either underway now or will be underway soon. You cannot use ARPA funds to pay for an infrastructure project that has already been funded or been accomplished, been finalized. Can you pay back for hazard pay? I'm assuming, Barbara, you mean, can you pay the city back for hazard pay? I can't remember the answer to that off the top of my head. I think that might be in the FAQ, and I would need to go back. I would go and look in Treasury's frequently asked question for that, because I believe they did answer that question. I just don't want to give you the wrong answer now. Can you pay an employee for lost vacation time because they were not able? So let me just say this. For those of you in your community, you want to make sure that you are utilizing your ARPA dollars on the highest and best use. And so if there are residents in your community that are on the verge of being thrown out of their homes or evicted, you should decide whether or not that's a highest use of funds or paying employee for lost vacation time. frankly. And that's why you really want to take the time to understand what the needs are of your local businesses and residents in your community, because doing vacation buyback may not be the best use or most important use given the need that exists. Can cities retain all interest? Yes, and that is included in the ARPA FAQs. The city of Eureka has a new sales tax that passed that made the revenue appear to be more as an allowance for something like this. In terms of calculating revenue, I believe so, but Treasury wants you to take into account what you would have received for your funds. So, and I don't think you know what, Barbara, again, I think I'm going to have to look into that because I do believe that the Treasury FAQs allow you to account for that in your lost revenue, which is why they want you to calculate your lost revenue over a period of 4 years so you can truly get what or replenish what you lost and then be able to adjust in the future years. So Amy asked, and I apologize for just calling first names. We just found out at the end of the year that our police department radios will be encrypted and will need to be replaced. Can the money be used for that? And if so, with the funds coming in late, can we use the money replenish? I think you can use ARPA funds for anything that's related, equipment, anything that's related to addressing the needs of the pandemic. I can't give you a yes, that sounds like an allowable use because I'm not sure what the individual circumstances are. Also, I will tell you that if you're looking for permission to spend funds a certain way and then spend them, you're not going to get it from Treasury. You're not going to get it from NLC or the league. You just have to use the best information that you have in the interim final rule in the FAQ. So I highly encourage you to look for it to be written there clearly. And if you don't see it, 9 times out of 10, it's not an allowable use. So I can't give you a definitive answer on that, Amy, but I can follow back up with you and look into that more. Can cities use the monies to supplement CDBG? That is a great question. I think it depends on what needs you're meeting, and I think it depends on whether or not you're doing work or spending the funds in a qualified census tract. Again, that's another area that I would like to have a further conversation before giving you a definitive answer. So Emily, I know I'm out of time. My alarm just went off, so I'll turn it back to you and just look forward to the continuing conversation so we can get you as many answers as possible.
Thank you so much, Irma. And thanks for everybody for being with us today. Like I said, the questions that we didn't get to, I see that there's a couple more here. We'll make sure to run that report, and I'll either have Irma get with you or Stuart here in the office can do it. But again, hope everybody has a great day, and thank you so much, Irma, for being with us.
Thank you and Stuart, and have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you for your dedication and service, and thank you for having me today.